trade. Don't get me wrong, it ain't all bad. I love the crazy fads, like England always buggering up, but you know we're gonna win the World Cup. I'm gonna start my own nation, with myself a reservation. I'm gonna start my own nation, with myself a reservation.
Keep the red flag flying here.
Good evening and welcome to Socialist Think Tank Political Unmuted Live. I am your host, Chantelle Lunt. I'm not your usual host, so Paul, why am I not your usual host?
So, one thing, because you're amazing. So that's one reason why you're the host. John is with us in spirit. He's on my T-shirt here, but and Laura's T-shirt as well. But John's had a bereavement, as many of you will know. Sadly, Barbara, who appears quite a lot on the after show, passed away. And we'll have a tribute to her in the little break a little bit later on. But what we lack in John tonight, and I'm sure everyone passes the best wishes to him and his family, but what we lack in John, we make up for in Chantelle. So I'm going to hand it back to you.
Thank you, and just sending best wishes to John. So thinking about this week, and yeah, what a week it's been. If we do a little round the room, and if everyone could tell me what your moment of the week has been. Who wants to go first?
Shall I do the jingle?
Oh, go on.
Go for it. Why not? So professional.
Always.
So who wants to go first? Paul, what's your moment of the week been?
My moment of the week just happened a little bit earlier on. It was Prince Andrew settling out of court, as all rich people seem to be able to do. So if you do a massive, horrible crime, settle out of court, and it's interesting because the statement seems to me to be pretty much an admission of guilt, where they were going to go down the lines of, oh, she's made it up all the time and that photo was a fake, and he's also got to make sure that he distances himself from Jeffrey Epstein. Now, why in the world, like that's like, yeah, please distance me from that guy. You know, like if I was Peter Mandelson, I'd be doing that too. But, you know, like, so distance yourself from the massive child sex trafficker. That is what you need to do. That is just a sensible thing to do, in my opinion. So that's mine.
That is a good moment of the week. A bit bittersweet, but it was never, everyone's like, oh, I'd like to have seen him in court, but it was never a criminal court, it was a civil court, so it was always either going to end in a payout or not. And, you know, the whole accusations towards the victim, it's gone completely to a charity, which is just like, you know, commendable. So Laura, what is your moment of the week?
Well, aside from the T-shirts that I was really excited to get, I'm so over the moon with the T-shirts. Check them out on our website. Go and buy some. They're amazing. I think this week, probably the People's Assembly national demo. We went to the Newcastle one, and I was really mixed feelings. It was like I was over the moon to be out and protesting again, and feeling like I was trying to do something, but also I was a bit like, oh, I really wish there were more people here. Like, this is so, I worry that it's not really cutting through how important, because the demo was basically about the cost of living crisis. And I think it's going to really start hitting people. So it was good that everybody was out. I would have liked to have seen more out. But then I saw the national pictures, and there seemed to be people up and down the country out protesting. So it was really lovely to be out with, you know, a group of people all like just shouting from the rooftops, just trying our best, and all that solidarity. It really, it helps your mental health. You're just like, am I the only one that cares about this? And you get there, you're like, no, lots and lots of people do. You just don't see it on the news. And it really gives you that spirit to sort of drive on and keep fighting. So that was my moment of the week for sure. It was really cool.
Oh, love. Did we all go to an little People's Assembly protest against the courts? The one in Liverpool was quite good. And yeah, I know what you're saying about the numbers, but I think they've got actions planned in March and April. So hopefully, as we get closer to April, when the energy prices are supposed to go up, people will start to go, okay, what action can I take, as you say? And there's nothing better than standing together and just being like, we're not putting up with this. But well done for getting on.
Yeah, totally.
Samantha, how about you? What's your moment of the week been?
Oh well, on Saturday I had the absolute joy of testing positive for COVID, so I've been locked in the house all week, which is loads of fun. As you can see, I'm not dying. I'm very tired, but not something that would usually stop me just ploughing through life. But Stuart said I should say about the fact that I ended up on the BBC News website last week. Bringing some awareness to the issue of abuse in local politics, and let's not put a too sharp a point on it. Abuse of politicians is a threat to democracy, and it's really serious. So, by all means, hold people to account and be passionate in doing so. But when you're telling somebody that you think they should be shot in the street, you're crossing the line. So a lot of stuff happening for me. Although, like I said, trapped in the house at the moment, not really enjoying it. Would like to be able to leave, but hopefully we'll be able to soon.
Sorry to hear you've got COVID, Sam. I'm wishing you a speedy recovery, but well done for keeping out there and getting on the BBC to raise that is a really important issue. It's got to stay classy, Ian, when we're challenging people. Keep it classy, no death threats. Stuart, over to you. What's your moment of the week been?
I'll be cheeky and I'll have two, because they're much smaller than anyone else has been up there. I went out door knocking because I couldn't get up to Newcastle for the People's Assembly demo. So I realised quickly how out of practice I was with that, because it's been basically 2 years since anybody's been on the doorstep doing door knocking type campaigning, and that was like being baptized the second time. It was an interesting situation. And the second one is that I got onto another future candidates program, the Unite Future Leaders program.
Yay.
Which I understand should be brilliant. But I got on the one in February, which was difficult because I'm also meant to go to a regional conference for the Labour Party those exact dates, so I had to beg to move to a later date. So thankfully that's gone through, and people keep considering me a candidate for some reason.
Oh, brilliant. Well done, Stuart. Well done for getting on that course, and I'm glad you can still go along to it. So if I had a moment of the week, it would probably, even though it was last week, it's one of those, where were you when you got this notification? And I was at a BBC event looking at my phone like, yay. Cressida Dick has resigned. This is last week's news. Woo! Made up. But obviously there's been a lot of debate over the weekend. As someone who used to be a police officer, I've had loads of reporters remembering that I was someone who used to speak about racism and sexism and calling me again to talk about the same thing again. But it sparked this a massive debate about the toxicity in the police force. We've had, obviously, Sadiq Khan has said he had no faith in her, so she had to resign, but then Priti Patel feels that he wasn't being very professional and was really upset. Today I've seen a article from the assistant commissioner, who is Baz Javed, who is actually Sajid Javid's brother, and he's basically responded to two black officers whistleblowing again about racism in the Met Force again by saying, yes, some officers are racist, but the whole force isn't racist. So I'm hoping we can have a little chat about this, because Baz is actually the top runner to replace Cressida, and obviously we can see a little potential conflict of interest there with him being the brother of Sajid, keeping in the family and all that. So what do we think? What do we think of Cressida's resignation, and do we think that by her resigning anything is going to change significantly in the force? Laura, what do you think?
I mean, I could just answer that in one word. No. I think Cressida Dick is a symptom of a problem that has been going on for years and years and years. It is the system is very nepotistic in its nature. It's no surprise that Cressida Dick's family went to Oxford and they all know the right people and they all get into positions of power. And you know, she did a few interviews leading up to her resignation and shortly after, saying that she was deeply saddened and she regretted it, but that she thought she had led a real transformation of the Met and stuff. And it just all maybe I'm getting cynical in my old age, but it all just seems like the same old thing. And I do believe it, once Cressida's gone, whoever comes next will put on a shiny new suit and go, look at me, I'm completely different. And actually nothing really will change, because the establishment will always look after itself, and it continues to do so. For me, Cressida Dick should never have even been given that job role anyway, considering the levels of distrust that were there in her anyway beforehand, because of things like, you know, the Jean-Charles de Mendes, I can never say his second name. I want to say Mendes, but she's an actress, so, but you know who I mean. You know, that whole, thank you, Paul, that whole situation was just unforgivable. It really was unforgivable. And she was in charge of the investigation at that time. And I just think, how do you rise through the ranks when you have failure on top of failure on top of failure, and people keep forgiving you for it? Why now has she chosen to resign? It's not because Sajid Javid has said anything. I don't think that would be enough to push her out. Something's happening behind the scenes. They've got the next one lined up, and I just feel like the whole nature of our power structures in this country, and let's be honest, most of the Western world is nepotistic, is all about power, is about who owns who has the money, who has the information, and it's nothing to do with rising through the ranks because you are owed that and you've worked hard for it and you care. It really seems to me that it's very clear now that goes through, it permeates every single faction of our society, whether that's police or government or so many other positions of power. It doesn't seem to me like there's going to be a great deal of difference, and there needs to be. And I think this goes back to what we were saying about solidarity and people coming together. The only way we make these people change is by coming out in force against them. You know, we saw what happened after the death of Sarah Everard, and how vile that got with the treatment of the people at those vigils, and but the strength that came from that, the strength of feeling that came up and down the country to say, no, this is not okay. And I believe that if people hadn't have come out in force against that probably could have been just, you know, swept under the carpet and forgotten about. So we really need to be coming out in force against these things that we think are a problem and they keep saying aren't a problem. You know, the police forces aren't homophobic, they're not racist, they're not misogynists. And it's like, well, I have a lot of proof here to suggest otherwise, so you need to listen. And things like this involve people power, trade unions. It is essentially just people coming together and going, no, this is not okay. And so, no, I think Cressida Dick's resignation is probably not something she wanted to do, something she felt she had to or was forced into doing. And I don't think that suddenly gives us a new lease of life for policing in this country. I don't think it's going to be the fixing of everything. I think it is just going to be the next one, and we'll more of the same.
Yeah. Unfortunately, I can't disagree with you there, Laura. It's a bit like when we said Boris Johnson was going to resign, and I was like, well, who's going to replace him?
Exactly.
It's dead interesting because you're saying, you know, she's had failure after failure after failure, but she's still been promoted. Again, a direct comparison to Boris Johnson, who's been sacked from every job he's had, yet is the Prime Minister of the country. But if we look at like these links, obviously, you know, we've got a politician's brother being lined up for the top job, and the police are supposed to be politically neutral. And obviously all of this has come about because they kind of opened an investigation to take the legs of Sue Gray's report and take all the bad bits out because it'll be, you know, it was compromised the investigation. What do we think? Do we think that there is that separation between politics and policing, or are they closer than ever? Paul?
I don't think there is a separation. There's a historical link between politics and policing, and what the purpose of policing is, and you know, we, we know the historical reason for the police is not to help the people. It was to help people who owned. Well, actually, a lot of people think it started with the people who owned other people, who owned slaves, and this is not really this lovely benevolent force that we like to see in the world. People would see the police as being this kind of this protector, whereas in reality they seem to be protecting themselves quite a lot. What interests me is that the thing that seems to have brought Cressida Dick down, despite all those things that both you and Laura have mentioned, Chantelle, it seems to be the fact that they've sort of turned a blind eye to these Downing Street parties, and there is something politically tangible in there. So Sadiq Khan went to speak to her, and there's something like, obviously there's public opinion there as well, where people are very annoyed with what Boris Johnson did during the COVID pandemic when they had the Downing Street parties, etc. Something really, for me, it's far less relevant than the damage they've caused to the people of the country. But this seems to be something that they think has got political cut through, and therefore Cressida Dick has had to resign. As people have mentioned in the comments, though, she's resigned on this huge package of a massive golden goodbye and a huge pension. I believe it's £500,000 lump sum and £150,000 a year that she's going to get. More money than any of us could ever hope for. We wouldn't have to ever work again for that kind of money, would we, or even close to it? So yeah, it's absolutely linked to politics, the decisions made, the appointments. Also, does anyone else get this weird feeling that like TV conditions us to think that there are only a small number of people in the world, and therefore they don't think it's weird that the health secretary's brother is going to lead the police, or potentially going to lead the police? That's so like astronomically long odds to have these people getting into positions of power, but it happens time and again with loads and loads of prime ministers having gone to Eton. That's really, really weird, and I don't think people have a clue how big the country is. It's like when people say, "Oh, we're full. We're a massive country. There's loads and loads of land. We're like 90% non-urban, in the country." So I don't think people understand the scale of things, and I don't think people really understand that, it is particularly weird to have so many prominent people in one family.
Definitely. Just looking at some of the comments coming in, like, why do we accept this from people in positions of power? But why do we? Do you think, Samantha, this might be the straw that broke the camel's back? Do you think this just the level? I mean, there's always been corruption, but the level of just really kind of unfiltered, it's so visible for everyone to see, has been touched upon. And the police are in kind of PR damage limitation. They've even contacted me this week. You always know they're having a bad week when they contact me to do an diversity seminar or whatever. So I'm like, oh, you're having a bad week of PR. But do you think they're going to be able to recover from this? Do you think we'll forget as the public?
I think it's done an interesting thing, which is it's made the Met Police everybody's business, where I think historically, like across the country, the Met Police, it's been like, oh yeah, that happened, well, it's the Met, and it's a joke, it's a running joke, wherever you're talking about police, oh, they got away with it because it was the Met. And I think scandals like what happened at Sarah Everard's vigil really shook everybody in the country, and has made people realise that actually, as long as we accept those standards of behaviour in the Met, that allows things elsewhere. And obviously the horrendous things that they did to Bieber Henry and Nicole Smallman, nobody would want that for their family. And the fact that it could happen, the fact that you would have a WhatsApp group full of people, and that maybe a couple of people would be held responsible, but I'd want every single person in that WhatsApp group to be held responsible, and I wouldn't want any of them helping my family in any way, shape or form in the future, because that's horrendous. So I think that's an interesting point, and I hope that light continues to be shone on the Met Police. It is an interesting one in terms of politics, the fact that the Met Police Commissioner is appointed by the Home Secretary, right? So yeah, and so right now we've got the government being investigated by the Met Police for their parties at number 10, and the person who's going to be effectively in charge of that investigation is somebody who was going to be appointed by the government. So we're doing really good in terms of the corruption stakes at the moment.
Yeah, it is. When you look at it, it's like, okay, you're a civil servant. Who's your boss? Priti Patel. And who's this report about? Her boss. So do we think this report's going to be transparent and going to point the finger at anyone? Not likely. Stuart, we're going to come to you finally. Do you think, obviously I work for this police force and I have my own opinions of that police force, but do you think this is something that is specific to the Met, or do you think it's just nationwide change that we need to kind of, obviously the Met are the ones that are spotlighted because they're London and they're the biggest force, but do you think it's a bigger issue?
I think it is a bigger issue. I think in the public conscience, the Met is kind of seen as this almost like a gold standard. Everybody looks to London as like this example of what we should be doing, and they get the best of everything and everywhere else gets a little bit less. And this is kind of shone the light on the fact that this isn't great. This is pretty awful at times. There's so much that needs to change. And I think it's got it into people's minds that they're looking at their own police forces, the kind of standards that they're seeing at home. Certainly, 10, 15 years ago, you wouldn't bump into people who would know who were, in charge of the Met. It just wouldn't be something that the public thought about. Now they're telling jokes down the pub about the Met, and its leadership. It's something very different, and I don't think it's going to disappear from the public conscience anytime soon.
Definitely. I did wonder because, like, the police, they're in and out of vogue so often. You only one like cat in a tree or something away from them being heroes again, and they do a hard job. I used to do the job myself, but since BLM, they've not got off the hook. And for me as an activist, as a BLM activist, as a former police officer, this is amazing. But I was always waiting for, we've had this big BBC show, The Responder, while it explores police corruption. It's very much endearing and kind of endears people to the police. And I thought, is that going to change public opinion? But I've been so surprised the public have just not changed course for 2 years. It's like the public are persistently and consistently saying, we want change, we want a better police force. And even, they brought out a report saying that the Met were not institutionally racist. Cressida Dick is saying it. And as you say, if you go down to the pub, Stuart, people are just, they're not, we can, like, it's like, no, like, we have eyes and we can see what's happening. But the question is, are they going to take it on board? And for me, it will always be a cultural issue. Like, Samantha, you touched upon the fact that these WhatsApp groups, 1 or 2 officers will be disciplined. But with Beaver Henry and Nicole Smallman, that picture had done the rounds with loads of officer WhatsApp groups. And for me, the significant bit was it was a new officer, a rookie who was training, who he showed it to her, and she went, this is awful, what's going on here? And so when I reported the police in my force, I was a rookie and a new officer. And what you find is you'll get these new officers who come in from the outside and they've still got that connection. It's a bit like a cult in the police, so you lose it, but they've still got that connection to the outside world and they've still got those standards, and they come in and they're like, what is that? Like, what is this? So they're the ones the most likely to put their hands up and say, this is wrong, this shouldn't be happening. But because of the ranking systems of the police, and it's about how many lines and dots you've got on your badge, on your shoulders, they're the least likely to be taken seriously. So I don't do you think a restructure would help? I don't know, just put it out to the group. What do we think, a restructure?
I don't know whether a restructure is like, it needs to be kind of dug up from the roots and something else. There are some good ideas out there, and the problem is we're so institutionalized towards it that when you suggest them, you're considered to be like this crazy radical thinker just an absolute idiot, you know. So there's people who've been talking about defunding the police, whereas instead of funding the police so much, you fund mental health services, because the police themselves say that they're spending more time on people's mental health than they are on actually solving crimes or stopping crime. And but that sensible idea of placing funding elsewhere is often met with absolute shock and horror, and like, oh, it's bad enough as it is. And you know, we all see in our communities that crimes tend to be they tend to go relatively unpunished, and no one seems to actually find anything out about them. You know, so why is it so radical to suggest that we need something quite different from what we have?
It's interesting as well, because in some ways America is actually ahead of us. So off the back of BLM, a lot of American forces put funding into community-led, non-armed initiatives that responded to, because as you say, most policing, like 90% of policing, is not crime, it's civil matters, it's things that you don't need any kind of kit to use. Most officers don't use the kit and don't need any kind of heavy-handed response. So they trialled in America non-armed civilian units, basically, you know, public services that we used to have in the UK, responding to incidents rather than the police, with the police just in the background in a station as a backup if you needed them. And it worked. And this is the thing, we need to understand that the police are responding, as you say, to issues that used to be responded to by children's services, social services, you know, doctors, nurses, a whole team of support systems, that social safety net. But now, you know, through 10 years, 11 years of Tory cuts, we haven't got those services, so it falls to the police, who will always arrest first and will always, you know, be quite, you know, heavy-handed first. So maybe it is just like refund our services. But there's some brilliant comments coming in. I love that someone's daughter did a little comment which I found funny, but people are basically saying, you know, it's quite extreme, the policing that we've got, and we do need to change, and maybe this is the point of change. It's got to get quite grim before we change. And speaking of change, we, as you mentioned earlier, Laura, we've all been on the street on Saturday demanding change, and I have a hot water bottle on my knee. This is because the cost of gas and electricity is going up, and I'm in the back room and I don't want to throw the heating on, so I'm just like looking at these money saving ways to not put the heating on. I was looking at this article, and I don't even know what paper it was in, but it was like ways to save money when the price of gas and electricity has gone up. Most of the savings they were putting on there would save you like £4 a year. And I'm like, gas and electricity is going up by like £600 a year, and you're trying to save me £4 a year. So the cost of living crisis is just at peak. You know, we've got increasing national insurance, we've got cuts to services, gas and electricity have gone up by 45%. It will be by April in the UK, while in places like France they're only going up by 4%. And on Saturday, the People's Assembly had everyone on the street, fantastic organisation. They had everyone on the street in most cities in England demanding change and really kind of making our voices heard. So we'll do another round the room. I'm going to start with you, Paul, because you're to my left. Did you go to a protest, and how do you think we can halt this gas and electricity bill that's coming for us in April?
I think the damage is already done, really. So yeah, I did go to a protest. I was at Newcastle with Laura. Ian Lavery was there speaking, so we had a nice chat with him and got a video for Socialist Think Tank. He made a powerful speech, as he always does. I think the protests are relatively limited, because I think while people are angry, people are also oppressed by what's going on. So the idea of travelling to Newcastle when you've got no money, the people who this is really affecting, like me and Laura were talking about this, and about, you know, we're thinking, dear me, are we going to have enough money? And both of us have decent jobs. And for us, it's kind of like, oh, we're going to have to, you know, maybe have a few, like fewer luxuries or whatever. But for some people, it will be the choice between, you know, having food or having a warm house, or maybe even not even be able to choose either of those things. So the idea of us all going to a place together and travelling and spending money on public transport, which is also like really, really poor in the northeast, and in many places around the country, only really London that it isn't poor. You know, will people be able to turn up there and think, yeah, I'm happy to spend my money on turning up to this place, even though I don't have one? And I think we really are limited by that. Also, the things haven't really hit yet. So there's things coming like the national insurance, and for me, national insurance rise just shows how little respect and how little economic understanding they have. Either they fully understand economics and know the damage they're doing, or they're economically illiterate. And I'll explain why. When they decided to raise national insurance in order to pay back, I don't know, maybe it was the tax cut to the banks that they gave. Maybe that's what it was to pay back. They said it was some sort of COVID thing. But they've raised national insurance. They're saying it's for social care. But we've already paid extra for social care on our council tax and all sorts of different things. And really, tax doesn't really pay for things in that way anyway. You know, it's spend and tax, not tax and spend. But we'll talk about that another time. But with national insurance, if they're going to take money away from ordinary people who pay national insurance, that will mean less money to spend in communities. That will mean less money to spend in local shops and local pubs and all those things. And that's damaging to the economy because you're taking money out of people's hands. What they're also doing is they are raising national insurance for employers. Employers are going to have to pay more and they're not getting budgets increased. So let's say, for example, in a school, if you have a certain number of members of staff, maybe 100, and the national insurance for them all goes up, suddenly they're thinking, we can't afford all these staff, and that staff number becomes 99, and you make that person redundant. And then one person is made redundant. That means 1% of people, fewer people with a job, which causes more problems, less money to spend, more money to have to find for people, on universal credit or whatever, even though that's insufficient. So this just spirals out of control. It causes huge problems. And the idea that at the same time as all this cost of living crisis, where we're seeing France's bills capped at 4%, and ours going up by like 54%. Because we haven't nationalised energy, and they have, and they own our energy as well, and all our energy supplies are kept offshore as well, and they're looking after their countries in Germany and in Scandinavia and so on. It just shows you that either they don't care about us whatsoever, or they're incredibly economically illiterate. And what worries me more is that I'm making this point, and I'm not hearing this point being made very often, very far and wide. It's not being made in the media. It's not being made by mainstream political parties. That is a huge worry to me.
Definitely. And while you were talking, absolutely amazing points, Paul. We've obviously, some of our listeners are saying about joining a union, demand a pay rise. But you've mentioned, obviously, socialist alternatives like owning the utilities, owning public transport. That would solve a lot of the problems that we're in. What do we think, guys? I'll just throw it out to the group. Obviously, at times like this, I love to think back to JC and all the amazing things he was going to do. But do we think the socialist policies would result in like this cost of living crisis being less, sharp and less felt across the nation, particularly with vulnerable groups? Go on, Samantha.
Stuart's going to go. I'm going to let Stuart go. Never butts in. He's too polite.
Right. There's one thing I know that we wouldn't have to do. We wouldn't have to struggle and chew on, right, to make sure that kids get fed. Right? One socialist policy that we could establish, and it would cost next to now, is just making sure that all kids had access to food. Full stop. Dead simple. Kids go to school. We know how to get the food in them. The food isn't hugely expensive. We can guarantee those kids meals, full stop. That's not an issue, and yet there's no political will to do it. And that's, frankly disgusting. And in the Northeast, like a quarter of the kids who, and the families turning up at food banks, those families aren't eligible for the free school meals. They're in that middle ground where they're not getting any social security support, and they're still in absolute poverty in reality. They're struggling, and there's no that's going to lift them up unless it's through welfare, through social security, through guaranteed means to access to food, to energy. And there's no will to do it. And I think a socialist government would have the will. it would be very easy to put into place quick, near instant, I would think.
Definitely. And like you say, it's like about needs based, isn't it? It's about like recognizing people's needs and going from there. Something that really baffles me with especially the local council cuts to funding is quite often the people who have the highest levels of deprivation, like Liverpool, we've got some of the highest national levels of deprivation, but we also have the highest levels of cuts to our funding. Whereas, you know, somewhere like Cambridge doesn't get the support, like they get less cuts, even though people are more affluent there. I don't know, is it the same in Newcastle? Do you get a higher proportion of cuts? Like, it baffles me, but it doesn't seem to make sense. It's not fair, and it doesn't seem to be looking at the most vulnerable. What do you think, Samantha?
Well, I would like to say the good news is we're looking at a fair funding review in terms of local authorities, but because the Conservative government is like an institutional version of that game Corrupt a Wish, where you say something that sounds good and then someone ruins it, of course, fair funding review doesn't actually mean that local authorities are going to get more money. They're just going to set some new arbitrary rules as to how things are going to be funded. So yes, you're totally right. The Northeast has suffered terribly from the local authority cuts, and we're very much impeded in terms of raising funds through council tax, because something like 95% of our properties in County Durham are Band A. So when you've got that much Band A properties, you can't redistribute the tax base and raise money in the same ways you can in Surrey, for example, which is usually the example that people bring up. So yeah, it is a real worry. And we know that state-owned utilities can lessen the burden on the people, because that is exactly how France is getting through this. So it's another one of these examples where people talk about state-owned transportation systems as if they're pie in the sky, but our commercial transportation systems in the UK are run by German and French state-owned businesses, and they have their own lovely state-owned transportation systems in their own country. So we've got this, it's another sort of post-fact era, post-truth era thing where people will confidently say it's impossible to have state-owned utilities and it's impossible to have state-owned public transport, when these things are very easily happening in other countries. So we just need people to wake up. Wake up, sheeple.
Definitely, Samantha. And it's like you called, you know, utopian and a daydreamer for believing the kids in the 6th wealthiest country in the world should have full bellies at night. Like, how is that the utopian dream? It's like, it baffles me. Like, to me, I'm just like, that whole 6th wealthiest country means nothing if one child in this country is going to bed hungry. Like, it doesn't mean a thing. It means absolutely nothing. So, Laura, I'm giving you the hard question. Obviously, Paul touched upon the fact that not everyone can access these protests, and you've said, you know, obviously we want numbers to be higher and we want more people to be engaged. How do you think we're going to engage them? How are we going to make sure, you know, service users and the people who feel these cuts and, you know, who are going to go to bed cold and hungry, the elderly, how can we bring them along in this movement? Because it's going to be a big movement potentially all year or longer.
It's going to be longer, Chantelle. It is a big job to do, because we've been socialized now to just accept what the media tells us, and as we know, the media do not tell us the whole truth, or at the minute even part of it. And so when people, and I understand why politicians, you know, do the things like, oh, heating and eating, and, you know, all those catchy things that, like, you try and reach out to your audience and go, this is dead catchy, they'll listen. But actually, it takes away from the message when you just use rhyming words and three-word sentences to try and get people to listen. Because essentially, what's happening at the minute, and this really feeds into probably the 99% of the topics we talk about on this show, is that it is nothing to do with individual factions of society trying to function in a decent way or not being able to function properly. It is the top 1% who are leading all these charges, is the top 1% who have everything to do with selling off the NHS, with raising our gas and electricity prices, with police in our streets. All of that is dictated by a very small few people who all know each other, and they all pat each other's backs and go, great job, without having any clue about what real people have to live like, about what real normal people's day-to-day lives are like. And it's always been scary, but has felt for too long that the poorest of the poor in this country don't matter. They haven't got a voice. No one cares. Keep them quiet. They're not going to do anything. They've got no power behind them because they've got no money. And that seems to have been factual for quite a long time, because what power do they have? They're far too busy trying to keep their kids alive, trying to get out to their 4th job of the week just to try and make any sort of money. This price hike in April is going to be quickly followed by another one in October. And we are going to start seeing deaths, and we are going to start seeing suicides, and mental health illness is going to absolutely rocket like it has all through COVID, when rich people have continued to make money and the rest of us have suffered. But not only that, the middle income earners, people who you kind of got, you should have enough money to survive. You should have enough money to live quite a comfortable life. These cuts are now going to start hitting them. And when we start going up that chain that shouldn't exist, more and more people are going to be started to be listened to. They're going to have to be, because we're moving towards people with a bit of sway, people with a bit of a voice in society. Now, that's not to say that that's right. Of course, it's not. We all know on this show that, everybody matters 100%. But actually, this government, and we can't say that the price increases of electricity and gas and power and petrol and all that isn't directly as a result of decisions this government have made, because they are the ones who are going to have to reap what they sow shortly, because eventually this is going to reach a point where it is unsustainable. People are dying. People are going to reach out and look for help. And that help is going to come in the form of activists, trades unionists, people who've been trying to fight this fight for a long time. And once we get these teams together, there's going to be far too many of us. It's about now lifting that veil and getting people to see that. And things like Socialist Think Tank and all the independent media out there need to keep plugging away. Our audiences might be small, but they do have a reach, of people who can make a difference. So that's where we start. And then we get out on the streets, we talk to people, we bring it up in everyday conversation at work, no matter how uncomfortable that might feel. You get the eye roll when you talk about politics, even if you work for a trade union. Trust me, I know. But you just need to keep going. And don't just fight with people. Don't just say you're wrong. Try and find out why they have those beliefs and go, actually, what have you thought about this? Because telling someone they're wrong is never going to be conducive to a decent conversation that's going to lead us to any sort of solution. But we need to get the people together on this and get them to realise that actually this is not our doing. This is being done to us, and we can fix it. But it's going to be a big job, because we've been doing this for hundreds of years. The little man has been fighting for hundreds of years, and we're going to keep going.
I want to give you a round of applause, Laura. That was amazing.
You should have shut me up long before now.
Honestly, just so many points to that. Voices that have more clout than others and kind of just engage in wider audiences, as you say. But for me, it's the everyday activism. It's not, activism isn't always big megaphones. Sometimes you can be just as powerful and reach just as many people by having a conversation with the person next to you, as you say, at the water cooler. As you were speaking, loads of comments came in, but Unity News put a comment in that I thought sort of captures what it actually is. He said it's not, heating or eating, it's living or dying. And that is literally where we're at. Some people are going to live, some people are going to die, some people aren't going to make it through winter, some people will starve to death. And we've been seeing this happen at an increasing rate again and again and again. But as was touched upon, there's going to be even more numbers. And speaking of potential mass deaths, the Ukraine and Russia are like, everyone's scared tomorrow apparently is the day that everyone thinks Russia's going to go in. They've been at the border. There's more soldiers there, but you know the politicians from Russia are like, you know, oh, there's double the soldiers. We don't know why, being really vague. I don't know if anyone saw that meeting with Vladimir Putin and one of his advisors on what can only be described as the world's biggest table. The table was huge. It was like, he takes COVID seriously. There was literally a 25-meter swimming pool between them. I mean, it's a serious issue, but I couldn't get over this table. I was just like, oh my goodness. And they've sent, you know, Germany in to negotiate and to talk them down. But Germany get the gas from Russia and would freeze without Russia's gas. So it all feels a bit like, what's happening? Paul, sorry, you're next. What is happening?
Okay, so this is a long running thing. This is to do with all sorts of things. If you go back to the Cold War, when NATO was set up to try and combat the what they saw as the threat of communism and socialism, not that Russia and the USSR ended up being particularly socialist or communist. It seemed to me to be they were doing exactly the same as capitalism. They just made sure everyone was poor, and you know, it wasn't really a great version of socialism as far as I can see. But when the Berlin Wall came down, they promised that they wouldn't expand NATO anywhere into the borders of Russia and to the satellite states of Russia, and that was a promise that was kept for I believe it was around 2 years. And then they changed tack and said, well, actually, anyone who wants to join NATO should be able to join NATO. And more and more of the former Soviet bloc countries joined NATO, and Russia feel threatened by that. Whether or not that they're justified in feeling threatened by it, they do feel threatened by that. And there is talk of Ukraine now joining NATO. There has been for quite some time. It's been interesting today because yesterday one of the Ukrainian ministers started talking about not perhaps joining NATO anymore, and now I'm hearing reports that Russian troops are moving away from the borders. So what Russia are, certainly the people of Russia and certainly Putin is saying are that there's potentially a threat of NATO right on their doorstep, and they've also got this huge pipeline as well that's going to pipe gas into Europe that's going to avoid Ukraine. So it's kind of like Ukraine are a little bit worried that they're going to be cut out of the whole situation. It's really, really complex. I've not really criticised Russia there. I think Russia is an awful, awful state. Like Russia, if you look at the atrocities of Russia, the way they treat gay people, the way they've invaded Crimea and annexed it, you know, they have done some absolutely terrible things. So in no way, shape or form am I defending Russia, but very few people are putting the point of view forward that like kind of it's a two-way thing here, where it seems to be okay for NATO to posture on the outskirts of Russia, but Russia, when they posture on the outskirts of the Ukraine, that's a big problem. And you know, we could maybe do with a lot of de-escalation here, and a lot more cooperation between countries rather than being adversarial. That said, we have a lot of maniacs in charge of different countries, which is really, really worrying. And these kind of strongman leaders that Boris Johnson aspires to be, that Putin is, I think maybe we need to be looking at a big model of much better leadership and much more sensible leadership, and maybe like have some nice women in charge rather than strong men, because they seem to be messing up quite massively at the moment. So yeah, there's a lot to think about, and it is incredibly complex.
Definitely. I'm just seeing Neil Teddy's comment come in, and I think it's like relevant. That's the word of the night, de-escalation. And as you've alluded to, you know, we need female with a level head going in there. We need mum kinds of settling things down, not dad riling the kids up, which is an awful analogy, but we're going to go with it. I just kind of, and speaking of children, this was like circulating on social media, and I always think it in times of war, when war's brewing, and, you know, when all our leaders who've got nothing to do want to cause or, you know, escalate one. And it's this question of, you know, years ago, if you were going to war or if you were fighting, you'd have your leader on a horse in front of you. They'd be the first in. The kids would be next to them, fighting with them. Now, they would be the last people you'd see on a battlefield, and they would never send their children into war. And so, like, there's this question of, what if it was their children? Do you think they'd be so fast to be starting all of this conflict, or not to be looking at alternatives? And I'm going to throw it out to the group as the last question on the Ukraine-Russia conflict. So whoever wants to answer that can answer it or jump in.
I think this whole thing, not to sound like a broken record, this whole thing does feed into that whole idea of power before principle, of power first. And I don't think it comes down to a question of, oh, if their children had to fight, would they do it? Because actually, I think these people, once you get to a certain level in the way our governments and our leaders are sort of set up, they'd never even consider that was even an option, because they're too good for that sort of thing. So we'll get the collateral damage in to do it for us. And I think, again, there's a whole conversation around that as well. People who go to war to fight, you know, of course, we all, you know, love the fact that we have soldiers who are dead brave and all of that. You know, I would hope that all goes without saying. But at the same time, I really want to just give them a shake and go, you know, your leaders who are sending you into these battles don't care about you. And you are there to do a job to get them more power and more money. Now, there's a complex situation, especially here between Russia and Ukraine. You know, since 91, when Ukraine became independent from Russia, and then the Berlin Wall came down, and it was this whole big thing, and it's all a power grab. But the expansion of NATO has been a big issue, because I think Putin's sort of saying that's a broken promise to him. You know, he was told that they wouldn't come in and get Ukraine, and then we're trying to protect Ukraine, and the Russians are trying to go. I kind of want to just talk to the people from the Ukraine and go, what do you want? Like, what do you want to do? Because you've got all these people coming in fighting for you. If only life was that simple, but unfortunately, it's all dependent on what the leaders do. And no, I don't think they would even consider putting themselves in the position of the people who have to fight for this, because our government they don't know what it's like to have 6 kids in a freezing cold house, not being able to feed them. And that's not, like, we're moving back to medieval times, and they still don't care. So why would they care about sending soldiers off to war? It's complicated and sad, and the answer would be so simple, be so easy. Just give a shit about other people. There you go, done.
Definitely. And it's like those disposable populations. It's a bit like COVID. There were disposable populations who can die, who can fight for us, and it's just there's a world of difference between us and them. And so, like you say, they wouldn't think of their kids ever going to war, because why would that ever happen? But moving swiftly on to our last topic before I leave you, we're going to talk about the UCU, who are just an OG, absolute legendary union. In Liverpool, they went on strike, they picketed, they did awesome actions, which saved 47 jobs. But they're back on strike today, I believe, doing around 10 days of action because of proposed cuts to the pension. I might be wrong though. Who knows the most about the UCU strikes? Who wants to go first? Stuart, I'm going to ask you.
I do. I'm by no means an expert, but they've got solid reason for being out. The cuts basically to people's pensions and their pay packets at the end of the day is massive. It's like 30%, which is life changing. Ultimately, you've built your life. You've designed your future around a set amount of money, about knowing what you've got coming in, and then your boss says, "Nah, we're going to change that." You have every right to be out there fighting, not just for what they deserve with regards to getting back what they had, but probably some more, because honestly, I think they're probably not paid enough in the first place. Certainly, we don't give teachers and the whole industry is such, probably the value it needs. Certainly, the management of education has become something entirely separate to the actual mainstay staff. Yeah, totally back them.
Definitely, the 100% back them. And I think for me, like, I'm like a mature student doing masters and all that. But obviously, we all know that teachers are like, they don't get the pay they deserve. But I always had this idea that like university lecturers were really well off and were like really on decent wages, and it was a really secure job. I think friends might have given me that idea because Ross got tenure. But then when I went to uni, like, and you're seeing precarious contracts, 0 hours contracts, people going to food banks, lecturers living in vans, and this really like this, you're right at the top of your level of academic achievement, but you still can't get a secure job because of the way these systems are set up and the marketisation of universities. And especially just watching the UCU and seeing, like, our UCU in Liverpool are just amazing. I know loads of others are. I've seen Chester as well, but just seeing them having to come out again and again and again, it's just like one kick in the teeth after another. And it's like, do you hate your staff? Like, I really feel like saying, universities, do you hate your staff? Can you not guarantee them a job? Can you not just give them a pension that they deserve, or preserve the mental health by getting enough staff in? What do you think, Samantha? Is it like a war on academics, or is this just peak capitalism?
It's interesting, isn't it? Yeah, it's a. Is it peak capitalism? I think you're right. It's shocking, the level of poor pay and poor stability in the academic. The fact that a lot of academics will have to have second jobs to keep themselves going, and it's through passion that they do it. One thing that did warm my heart was the thing that I saw on the Durham University Student Union page, where they're offering striking lecturers free coffee in the Students' Union, which is nice. I think we often forget that Students' Union is a union, because it's kind of one of those, can't see the wood for the trees, and it's nice that Durham Students' Union are keen to rediscover the second part of their name and support, because this is the other thing that the media like to do in these situations, is play the students off against the teachers, and thankfully I hope that a lot of students appreciate the fact that without strong unions supporting their teachers, their university experience would be much poorer, and these are people who do what they do because of a passion and a vocation, and if they only put in the amount of effort that they get paid for, then they would have a much diminished university experience.
Definitely. Student support has been like really consistent throughout all the strikes that they've been doing, and it's brilliant. Here's the students on the radio, and I know again, refer to Liverpool ones, the student support in Liverpool has been absolutely incredible. It's like everyone's up against the same monster though, the same obviously marketisation and hierarchy of universities monster. Someone did just comment, Paul Smith, just saying it's not just a UK problem, it's happening all over the world. It is, and there were other comments saying that higher education should be free. I am 1,000,000% behind you with my life. I don't even know what my student debt is. I'm never going to look at it. But yeah, it should be free. It's ridiculous that we have to pay. And it's all of this competition that is driving, just reducing the value of staff and driving costs up. And so students and staff are fighting the same monster. But we're at 10 o'clock. I'll see if anyone wants to add any comments, but that's all from me. And I'm so made up that I reached like my perfect time. Bang on 10 o'clock.
Well, yeah,
That was awesome.
Well done.
yeah. Just to like do a little comment on that, it's average vice chancellor pays over £250,000, and you've got the the marketisation and the expectations that are put on the staff because people are paying for a service rather than education being a right. I think that's really, really important. It just creates these conditions, like you've got people who you have to have a PhD, but you're going to get paid less than £20,000 for your job, but you need a PhD to do it. There's something wrong there, especially when like that the vice chancellor will be getting more than 10 times that pay, in some cases over £500,000 in, I think it's in 6 universities around the country. So yeah, peak
I'm
capitalism.
gonna, I want to take us over 10 o'clock. Sorry, I would take full responsibility. It's my fault, but it's not just the marketization of it. It's actually the commodification of education now, and people can make money out of this, and it is something that people can sell. Again, it brings us back to the rich versus the poor, because apparently only the rich are worth educating. So we can charge what we want because the rich people in the country are the only people who are clever. And I just think, again, that is not by accident. It's been designed that way so that people can continue to go to Oxford and Cambridge, who have the right family members, who can then go to lead our governments, to lead our police forces, to lead our high offices in the country. It's just perpetual. It really is. And if they can make money out of it, why not? And I know a few people have sort of said that there's some students who aren't supportive of the strike, and some people just want lecturers to be in doing their job. As a trade unionist for an education sector myself, I can make it very clear that strike action is always the last resort. There's a lot happens before people go to strike action, and it's not through greed, and it's not through just wanting to cause a stir. It is because these people have had enough and they want what they're entitled to. So a strike action, it takes a lot to get there. They don't just wake up one day and go, do you know what? I'm not going to bother going to work today. It's a long process to get there. So for those who aren't supportive of people taking strike, I would just ask people to bear in mind the fact that there have been long conversations that have happened before people have decided to start a picket. It is difficult. It's very difficult. But we are in a situation now where the majority of people in this country are not being paid what they're owed. And it's about time people stood up. So for me, there should be strikes up and down the country until people get what they're owed. But it's the government who need to listen, not just universities.
Love national collective strike. Let's all go on strike until they lower those living and gas prices. Love it. We should. Thank you guys. Thank you for inviting me to host tonight. You've all been amazing, and the comments have been brilliant. They've been coming in throughout the night. Sorry if I didn't read your comments out. But yeah, thank you.
Yeah. And we're going to be back in a couple of minutes for a chat. Samantha, are you going? Are you going to your COVID bed?
COVID bed. Yep.
Yeah. So at the halftime, at this point, we're going to play a song, and we're going to come back for a few minutes afterwards to deal with the comments, so that the other panelist, which is you at home, can get your full attention that you deserve. And there've been some really, really good comments about racism and things like that we probably should address. So that'd be really, really good to be able to address those. But what we'll do now is we'll play this. Just to warn, if John's watching, we're going to do a little tribute to Barbara. And if you're not feeling like you can deal with that at the moment, then please don't feel like you have to keep watching at this point. But we did want to do something for her, so we will now play No Passaran, and we'll be back in 5 minutes.
My name is Jack Atkins, and I'm not afraid. And I live and die by this vow that I've made. The only good fascist, a dead one, they say, and around the real we are. When I first left all them months ago, I told them I'd come not to kill but to cure. For an ambulance driver, my shot's pretty sure. And around the real we are. There'll be no passaran, no passaran, no passaran today. The fascists have come for our freedom, and we ain't gonna give it away. There'll be no passaran here today. I told my mother now, mother, know to be strong. For the left way is right and the right way is wrong. And you can stick that on my grave when I'm gone. For I'm a real we are. There'll be no passaran, no passaran, no passaran today. Fascists have come for our freedom. We ain't gonna give it away. There'll be no pass around here today. Cast may be cast, and the cast may be cast, but you armies of darkness, you best do your worst. 'Cause to win, yeah, well, you gotta get past those first, and around here we are. There'll be no pass around, no pass around, no pass around today. The fascists have come for our freedom. We ain't gonna give it away. There'll be no pass around here, no pass around, no pass around, no pass around today. No pass around, no pass around, no pass around today. No pass around, no pass around, no pass around today. The fascists have come for our freedom. We ain't gonna give it away. There'll be no pass around here today.
Welcome back, everyone. Lots of people saying how much they enjoyed that tribute. So yeah, we really already miss Barbara, but we definitely wanted to tell everyone how much that is the case. So yeah, love to all her family, and hopefully we can do what we intended to do and bring a more socialist world into reality. That will be the best tribute we could possibly give to Barbara, so we'll keep on trying like we always do. Thank you everyone for your comments. We've had so many of them. Are there any that have really stood out to you tonight? Anyone on the panel at all? Are there any that we think, oh, we should really go back to that one? There was one from me very early on from Quantum Skyline when we were talking about the first topic. Let's see where that was. I'll have a look at that. Were there any others that we want to have a look to as well? Oh, hang on. Sorry, that was you. You were all muted. That's my fault. I always make one mistake a show, Chantelle. So that was my deliberate mistake.
It was probably a good thing you muted me.
I muted all of you. If any of you had come in, you'd all be muted. So yeah, sorry about that. So sorry, Laura. Would you repeat what you said there?
Yeah, I was just saying I spotted early on. I wrote her name down so I'd remember it. Emily Morton's comment, her and Quantum Skyline had a little to and fro about the cost of living crisis and how it was impacting them already, and that's before it hit its peak, and it's really scary. It's really scary.
I think the comment here, it says Quantum Skyline said, I was told I would not get a pay rise this year, as it means passing costs to our customers. Some of our customers are oil and gas companies, which I have big issues with. So he doesn't want, he's not going to get paid more because they don't want to charge the oil and gas companies more. And Emily was saying that was disgraceful, but also made the point that people in the opposition made sure that the government stayed in government.
Well, I think it was Emily who'd actually started that conversation. Early on in the conversation, she'd mentioned how she was dealing with this cut.
on universal credit, and only heat up the smallest room in a home with blankets, a hot water bottle, and using a medium electric setting. Try not to use hot water, as I can't afford to keep topping up gas.
Can you imagine Boris Johnson sitting in the house going, "Oh no, turn the water off. We can't put the heating on today." Can you imagine? Yeah. They don't have a clue. And like, we're all right. We have all right jobs. Like, we're not flush with cash, but even now I'm like, I do not want to get the next bill. So how are people on universal credit who also, let's face it, universal credit is nowhere near enough money to even survive. And then they've cut it. It's just, what are they doing?
It's at the same time as this has gone on, the government's essentially made universal credit worth 4% less and the state pension 4% less. At the same time as they know that this extra burden's gone on, all they had to do was maintain it at a 0% decrease. But they chose to further almost, damage people, hurt people, at this point humiliate people with the kind of lives that they're leading. It's an absolute disgrace. We've got people who are being told to work from home, doing decent jobs, who are sat on their laptop doing, jobs that you would think is a profession, right? And they're sat with gloves on and hot water bottles. And it's like the cottage industries of the 1800s. It's disgusting that we're back there.
We kind of...
It's like someone put a comment in about their back room. And I was like, as you say, like, Paul does a decent job. We've got decent jobs, but I am obsessed with like not using, especially because I work from home now, with not going over on the electricity and gas bill. So I just don't put the heating on in the day as a choice because I'm like, I don't want to be spending extra, and I'm not heating the one room that I'm in. So I've always got a little hot water bottle. But like, I sound like my mother now when I come home and every light's on in the house. I'm like, it's like cool illumination. Get all the lights off. These bills are going to be sky high. But it's like this ongoing anxiety about the bill. And only when I see the bill, I'm like, oh my God, because it's just being drummed into us. But for me, like, the biggest kick in the teeth was this £200 energy bill loan that has to be paid back. How does that help anyone? Like, how?
It's funny you should mention that, because that was exactly the sort of thing I was going to mention. People who are working from home are actually being like having to heat the homes while they're there, and it's causing an extra cost. And maybe it's negated a little bit by travel, but it's been really interesting. That's something as trade unionists we had to have a look at to see what costs were being incurred by people working from home. And with the energy prices going up so much and the electricity, like people having to use their own electricity to go online to meetings, and it's kind of like during COVID, it's been normalised. There's been some really, really weird things being normalised that I've noticed, which is one of them is turning up to work when you're ill with anything but COVID. So people are like rocking up and they're like vomiting everywhere, and you're like, you need to go home. This is awful. Don't do this. And but oh no, it's not COVID. And I don't care if it's not COVID. Go home. You're not well. And then the other thing is just like using your own home and your own facilities to do your job. And these are things that kind of need to be addressed as well.
And it's also like, you know, the requirement to have those facilities. So, you know, if I took a job as a call centre person or somewhere, it's not really required that I have my own internet and computer and all those things. But for most of the work from home jobs I do, it's not like I don't get a computer. Like, it's all my own stuff. Do you know what I mean? There's just this like expectation that you have a house with all the things you need to set up your computer, your mic, everything, and have meetings.
Every house has an office now. Like, some employers should be paying like 15% of the mortgage for people, because 15% of their house is now a workplace, and that really needs to be looked into. It's not like we'll knock a couple of quid off your tax because you work from home. This is a real massive cultural shift that needs to be, you know, built into how we move forward. We can't just assume that we're all going to absorb the cost of creating at-home workspaces.
Yeah, and
it's got to be done by the employer. They've got to pick it up.
And at the same time, you can mark my words that every single person who says they work from home but really they work from the golf course will be getting every single benefit and every single tax break that's available for having their home office. Like, you know, so it's the ordinary people who don't have these, who basically the pay-as-you-earn people, tax, who just, you know, who see the worst of this, and then every other trick in the book will be used by the people who have plenty of money. On Black Lives Matter and the police, Cressida Dick earlier on, there's something that I would want to ask you, Chantelle, because like we didn't really go into the racism very much in the chat about Cressida Dick. You were talking about the complaint of institutional racism that Mr. Javed was replying to. What was that about?
So 2 officers had raised a complaint, but they basically not gone. So they were talking about, you know, the work culture, it's dismissed as banter, basically just the usual WhatsApp groups and all the other ways that they're racist. And they've gone anonymously, I believe, to the BBC. And so his criticism, he basically said he's disappointed in them because they didn't think that they could go to the force and they've gone to the press. Like me sat here as someone who went to the force and didn't go to the press, like 100% understands why those officers did not go to the force. A, you're completely ostracised by the force, and B, they don't do anything about it, and then they sweep it under the carpet. But there's been an even bigger one come out, which is a historical one, from an officer who's just retired out the force, and he's released pictures of when, I think 10 or so years ago, when other officers painted the face white and said, now you look like us, you'll fit in properly. And just these really horrific accounts of racism and, you know, homophobia. I think he was the first officer to come out in the police force. So we just had this really horrific experience. But I feel like it's interesting because, you know, racism's been a massive conversation in the Met, you know, Viva Henry, Nicole Smallman, the WhatsApp groups, just loads and loads of instances of racism. But I don't think racism alone would have ever got anywhere near a resignation from Cressida Dick, because it was just like, oh, it's racism, we'll just deny it, we'll just say we're not institutionally racist. It's only when what happened to Sarah Everard happened that people were like, okay, something has to change. And that again speaks to, you know, the deserving victims, although what happened to Sarah was terrible and absolutely awful. Again, we had 2 sisters who's had something awful and terrible happen who were black. So it's only when it sort of comes into the white middle class that people are like, something has to change. It's a bit like what Laura said earlier, of only certain voices matter in certain conversations. And because this was, you know, this is the white middle class England who are now being impacted by the police's corruption. Forget all the stuff happening to black officers, black victims, everyone, Stephen Lawrence's family upwards. It's only when it starts to bleed into other areas of society that people go, okay, there's something wrong with the police. But black people, black officers, black everyone have been saying this forever. We've been saying the Met are institutionally racist and they target our communities and like disproportionately. But it's only now that it's really coming to the fore.
I think it's a damning indictment of the racism, actually, because it's very intersectional as well, because you had Sarah Everard, clear misogyny. Then they covered it up and it was like, okay, we're fine with misogyny. And then And only then, after that, when a white woman was killed, did we find out really the details of Bieber Henry and Nicole Smallman, because I'd kind of heard about it, but I didn't. And that was absolutely shocking. It was absolutely disgusting. And it goes to show, like, maybe if they were two blokes, it wouldn't even been on the radar, because I do think there is this intersectionality here. It is misogyny, and it is homophobia, and it is racism, and it's all these things that seem to just come together, and there seems to be like a hierarchy of them. Like, we don't care that a woman's killed. Oh, we care even less if Black women are killed. And it's just, it really is an archaic point of view and opinions that I honestly would have thought by now we'd be long without, because there's no justification for it. In this day and age, there's no justification for it. You can say, oh, I was brought up like that. No one should be being brought up racist or homophobic or misogynistic. There's no justification. And it just boils my piss that there seems to be, all these arguments are interlinked, but they all have their own strength in that they're all important, and none of them should be a thing. And we see them all in these positions of power. I realise I've had a right go at power tonight, but just... honestly, I do think it's all interlinked. It really is.
Don't worry, power will be all right.
Yeah, well, exactly right. I'd say what I want, because they'll just go whatever.
It'll go.
We've got the money.
It'll go. Yeah, power go and look. Why I So we've got a question in from Chris Hood, who often brings up things about like Durham County Council specifically, but what we've got here is we've always had a Labour council in County Durham until the last one, and there was a lot of suggestions that basically a lot of people campaigned on not raising council tax, and there were some suggestions that they were going to raise council tax anyway, but he said thoughts on the joint administration's proposal for a 0% core council tax rise in County Durham. Yeah, like that's good. That's fulfilling a promise, I guess. I don't know what you mean by core, to be honest. I don't know if there's anything anywhere else going on, but generally, yes, I think at this time keeping council tax low is a really, really good idea. I hope it doesn't lead to cuts in services. Basically, I would scrap council tax altogether and do something much more fair. And I would love to see central government giving councils and particularly parish councils actually some more money and more power, because we've had to raise our parish council precept for the first time in my entire... I've been a councillor for 5 years, and it's the first time we've ever had to do it. And simply because everything is... we couldn't afford to continue doing what we were doing if we didn't. So yeah, it's good to keep it low. Stuart, did you want to comment on that one?
Yeah, my understanding of this isn't that the council tax isn't being increased, that it's a 0% increase, that it's actually a 3% increase, but that because of the inflation means that the amount of like revenue income that the council receives is identical year on year. They've not got any more money, they've not got any less money, but in reality they did have to increase the tax to maintain that amount of money, to match the inflation, to balance it out. So in reality there is an increase, and like you say, with the parish councils and most councils, they're trying to minimise that without suffering any further losses, because austerity's done so much damage, certainly to big authority councils like Durham County Council. Savage cuts came from the Conservative and Lib Dem led austerity machine, let's call it, because that's what it was. That's basically the only policies that they had at the time, other than 5p shopping bags. Yeah, and I think it's right that we don't pass it on, but it's also not right if we don't call it out for what it is. We're only in this position because of, austerity politics.
Oh, right. Okay. It's Chris has also mentioned it's a 3% adult social care precept tax rise to pay for care workers and a decent wage, ensuring we have sufficient care staff. That's got nothing to do with the core tax amount. So I'm guessing is that a 3% rise overall, and then but that's going to be the social care one that the government have kind of forced on people. I think that sounds right. If I'm wrong, please do tell me, Chris. But yeah, that was quite a specific question. What did, like, just to expand on it a little bit, what did both Laura and Chantelle think of, I think it's Steve Reid, the new number 10 guy, who came in as part of Boris's reshuffle, where he's going, oh yeah, well, you know, we'll get rid of corruption at number 10. And he came in and said, yes, my top priority is to shrink the state. Basically meaning, you know, he thinks the reason that Boris Johnson had so many parties at number 10 was because our bins get collected too much. What do you reckon?
Well, they do. My street is far too clean. I think we should push that to once a month. And then, you know, give those poor folks some money, for God's sake. No, it is just another one of those people who come in all shiny and new and promising the world, and then, but like, it lasted a day before he said something absolutely ludicrous to show us that none of them have any idea of what it's like to live in the real world. They don't. They live in this. When we went to London that time, Paul, we were walking down past Westminster. I was like, oh, it's really nice here. It's really lovely, and you can see what the politicians see. That's their reality. It's gorgeous, big white buildings, really old, beautiful architecture. You walk down the road a bit and you're like, oh, right, yeah, this is the real world. This is what I recognise. And they would never need to say that. So, of course, they haven't got a clue. None of them do. This is why I will continually advocate for more working class people in Parliament. I recognise that Parliament is a flawed system, is not perfect, but it's what we've got at the minute. And there's too many people who all went to the same school. they literally all went to the same school, who all rule all of us. It's not okay. We need more working class people. So if you do have selections coming up in your area, pick someone who's from your area who knows what they're talking about, please.
Definitely. It's interesting you mentioned the bins though, because we've, on top of obviously the proposed 3% increase in council tax, one of our increases is in Liverpool a £40 a year charge for your green bin, which is like your garden waste to be emptied, and it's like, so they're charging you for trying to save the environment. But that response is just the classic, you know, neoliberal blinking response of, oh, we're going to cut back the welfare state, but we're going to increase state surveillance, and we're going to increase, you know, the kind of paternalistic state who's watching you all the time and is kind of increasing laws, building super prisons. So it doesn't mean they're going to roll back any part. They're going to roll back the public services we need, but the state reach and the state spying and the state, all of those negative things they do through the 20,000 police officer recruitment and all of those cameras that we have, you know, we're the second most surveilled state in the world. That's going to increase. So it doesn't mean that they're going to be any less visible and kind of coming down on the working class as hard as they are. It just means that they're going to continue to help us less and less, which is just really disheartening.
Absolutely. I got the name wrong. It wasn't Steve Reid, it's Steve Barclay. And Stephen Gillen said Stephen Barclay is hopefully the last person who Johnson can go to, a very right-wing child of Thatcher. And I can feel the venom coming from that one. He's not saying that because someone who has any fondness for Thatcher at all. Also, we had, well, I'm going to do a few comments now as well. We've had Neil Turry saying that that Julie wins the comments tonight, and what he means by that is Lizzie Fletcher said when we were talking about about not picking up the bins, she said, yeah, the kids love playing in abandoned fridges, let's bring that back. And Julie Sturck says, we can't, Boris likes to hide in them. So good work. Nice. Comments again. So and I think it's Icho has been very active in the comments tonight. There's been all sorts of breakups and reconciliations and stuff like that. You are very, very welcome here. You seem to be promoting a union, a group of trade unionists who want to really stand in solidarity with one another. Specifically, like you did mention earlier on, the fact that Some university staff don't seem to link up the problem with having outsourced cleaners in there who are getting really low paid. A lot of the time that's a way to get people below minimum wage as well, because they'll outsource it, and then someone will be willing to break the minimum wage laws in order to, you know, get a cheaper contract for themselves and skim some money off the top. Because I often think if you can get a cleaning company to do something for less money than it takes for you to pay the same amount of cleaning staff minimum wage, you know there are corners being cut. There is no cut to be made there. So I often think that, yeah, really, really good point. So thank you for bringing that one up. And and if you look after security, you can shut the place down. That's an interesting thing. If you look after the security staff, get the security staff on side when you're doing your strikes. That's always a good tactic there. So well done. On behalf of Socialist Think Tank, what I'm going to do is I'm going to not make a closing comment myself. In a moment, I'm going to come to a closing comment from Stuart, and then from Chantelle, and then Laura is going to do what you do with Socialist Think Tank and things like that, and then we'll say goodbye. But how can you become a member and things like that. But I want to say on behalf of Socialist Think Tank, Chantelle, you've been absolutely amazing, a brilliant guest host. We always see this show as being hosted by John D. Clare, so what an amazing, to step into his role so well has been absolutely incredible. And let's see you in the show again at some point in the future as a panelist, because your opinions are absolutely class. So, Stuart, do you want to do some closing comments? Then we'll go to Chantelle.
I'll keep it basic. If you want a decent life, you want decent opportunities, Tories out, get Boris out. Let's do something. Let's change the world.
Great. Chantelle.
Nice. I would say join a movement. We've got lots of national coalitions. Join an activist movement, get on the streets, and let's bring about some grassroots change.
Perfect. Laura, tell us about Socialist Think Tank and what you can do to just to do what Chantelle said with us.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Socialist Think Tank, we are socialists. Come join us, be part of us, help us. And we'll help each other. You can find us on socialistthinktank.com. You can become a member, and because we're socialists, you can join for free. We don't have amazing bells and whistles. All we have for you is solidarity and love. So come and join us. If you do have that little bit extra money, because we are socialists, please do feel free to donate so that we can continue making this content for you. We don't make very bare minimum, like this much out of any merchandise, but you need to see our new merchandise. This is John's specific for Political Unmuted. We have absolutely tons. All the badges that Rochelle, our designer, makes are on there. We've got the I Can Loach badge, we've got the Palestinian Solidarity badge, we've got the LGBTQI plus badge, everything. Go have a look at it, have a look at our t-shirts, buy them, spread the word of Socialist Think Tank. That's what this is all about. It's not about making money, it's about spreading solidarity, and that's what we want to do. So please do join us. As always, in the comments on every show, you are always the 5th or 6th panelist, depending on which show we're on, and we're really grateful for you. So do join us, become part of us, and you can be on the show too. You know, you don't just have to be in the comments. We welcome people to be in our show, and we are trying to expand as well. So we have like Socialist Think Tank West Midlands, Socialist Think Tank South East, Socialist Think Tank London. We want to grow, so please do join us, and we'll force you to start your own channel.
Thank you so much. Couldn't have said it better. And thanks to Rochelle for doing all the designs as well, because she's amazing, and she does such good work, and she works incredibly hard. And I will now say goodbye to you all, and take care.
Keep the red flag flying here.